SFBBO, promoting sustainability by engaging communities for more than 40 years. Our Birdie Hour speaker series is a free virtual program. On August 13th, 2024, biology student Laura Sang and her mentor John Dunn gave a talk about Tyrant Flycatchers of the West for our community.
Thank you so much for coming back to speak to our community again. And if you want to spend a little bit of time introducing yourselves and talking about how you started your partnership, that would be great. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Kristen. I've just turned 70 and been involved with birds since age 8. So it's been a while. My interests in birds are pretty all-consuming, but I'm just as interested. I majored in college and have an undergraduate degree in political science with a minor in history, which I guess you could periodically, they're kind of important too. So I'm very involved in monitoring things. Or I have my entire small house is full of books, birds and everything else. If a fire ever occurs in my area, it'll go up like a bomb of the amount of burning material. It's these days with birds, I love birding in Inyo County as much as, and being here in my little community of Rovana, which is an old tungsten mine. I spend a lot of I still lead a few tours, but those are beginning to wind down with wings. And a lot of my time is spent with the taxonomic committee of AOS and motions and trying to figure out what they say about the genetic studies that are being done. And also now back again on the California Bird Records Committee, but also have an interest, of course, in doing some shorter papers that take a little bit less time. My connection to Laura, I've been very involved much of my life, a charter member with Western Field Ornithologists, past president, many years on their board, and was reading the newsletter and saw an article on Western bluebirds, a synopsis of her studies by a girl that was 12 or 13 years old. And as I was reading it, I was immediately caught by how advanced it seemed for her age. And she had internal scientific citations exactly in the right part of the sentence. And I just was amazed and thought, who is this person? And so eventually I met her at a rare bird, a sulfur-bellied flycatcher, and the two of us have become friends and colleagues, and she helps very much with programs that we deliver, and we discuss many aspects of ornithology, and it's been really one of the events in my life to watch her just head off into the stratosphere and become an ornithologist and carry on the tradition.
Wonderful, thank you. Laura, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. I've been birding similarly to John since I was 8, but I'm 17 now, so I've been in the game for a much shorter time than John has been. But I really enjoy birding, but I also really enjoy ornithology. As John mentioned, I did a project with bluebirds back when I was in middle school, and I published a paper off of that shortly after I graduated middle school. And as you mentioned, Western Field Ornithologists was a really important organization at a very critical time in my life while I was trying to figure out what direction I wanted to go and trying to find, a career and a mission that I felt had a lot of purpose and would bring value to both me and, the natural environment. And so Western Field Ornithologists is special to me because I've never been in an organization quite like it. It's composed of both birders and ornithologists. And I think the special thing about that is that often these two communities are working towards similar goals. They're interested in similar things, but they don't often overlap. And that organization helped me with that transition as I wanted to go more into ornithology while also valuing the input and the knowledge that birders have. So after graduating middle school, I felt that a traditional education pathway wasn't really fitting for me. Considering my goals and what I wanted to do, I didn't really feel like I could pursue the passions that I had and the learning opportunities that I wanted in high school. And so I applied to a program called the Early Entrance Program at Cal State LA. And it's the only program in California that allows minors to pursue undergraduate degrees. And so that program has allowed me for the last 3 years to do an undergraduate degree, have those classes, but also those research opportunities and that opportunity to network with people that I really wouldn't have otherwise had at my age. And so I'm getting closer to graduating. I'll be starting my senior year in a little over a week. So I am, a little nervous to be closing out this chapter, but also very excited for where I could go next. I plan to start applying to grad schools this fall and hopefully start on a journey with a master's or a PhD program next year. But while I've been in college, I've also been afforded a lot of different opportunities, both more on the birding side of things and also on the research side of things. I'm really interested in the dunlin, which is a calidrous shorebird that displays a lot of geographic variation. It breeds all across the circumpolar, Arctic, and subarctic. There's a lot of interesting things about subspecies, and I wrote an article for Birding Magazine, ABA's Birding Magazine, last December. And right now I'm working on an article on tule goose, the Elgasi subspecies of greater white-fronted goose, for the next December issue. And I'm also working on a research project in collaboration with the Natural History Museum of LA, working on tail color and microstructural wear in yellow warblers. So hopefully maybe the next time I'm back here with SFVBO, I'll have more updates on that project. But we're getting interesting results so far, so I'm really excited for that. I guess the last thing is this summer, I just got back from San Diego from a 3-month internship at the San Diego Natural History Museum, where I learned with Phil Unit on how to prep specimens, how the collection is run, how he edits Western Birds, which is the Journal of Western Field Ornithologists, and just learned a lot of different aspects of curation and field work and how valuable museum collections and natural history archives are to research and just the preservation of knowledge and change and evolution over time. So yeah, that's basically it. Kind of rambled on for a bit too long, but excited to get started with this flycatcher presentation.
Can I just insert and ask one more thing, Laura? The part of Laura's story goes back to she started looking at birds at 3, and I've been told by her parents that they drove from Orange County on weekends. They had a yearly pass to go to the San Diego Zoo. And Laura loved the aviaries. And I know how Laura looks at things. She'll sit and can stare at them for hours. And she loves spending time in the African aviary. And at the San Diego Natural History Museum, when birds die, they're in live collections, they get sent to the museum. So, and Laura helped prepare those specimens. And I can imagine, Laura, you probably prepared a few specimens of birds that you first saw when you were 5 years old. that
Yeah. It's a special partnership with the San Diego Zoo, and it's really extraordinary because it's afforded the San Diego Natural History Museum an extraordinary diversity in the collections. I believe it's somewhere like 85% of all the world's bird species, or probably more than that now that, we haven't updated that number, but a lot of birds you otherwise would never get to have specimens of are there, which is really, really amazing. For example, like sandgrouse from Yemen, a collector couldn't just go there and get that specimen, but we have that in the collection. So it was really kind of a special moment for me because I grew up on going to natural history museums, going to see birds, both in the wild and at zoos and everything, and having that all come together in one experience in a building that has meant so much to me in my childhood, and in a place where so many people are working towards what I think is an extremely important common goal, is was just really special because collections span across time, it spans across people, it spans across various both anthropogenic changes we've seen and also natural changes. So yeah, I could go on and on about how collections are important both to science and to me, but yeah. Why don't you start us off, John?
Well, very good. This talk, we've given this talk in one form or another at least once or twice, and the whole concept was, and what motivated me to do the talk, flycatchers are really difficult. The first thing is, these are New World flycatchers, Tyrannidae. Old World flycatchers are more closely related to thrushes. It's much like Old World warblers have nothing to do with our wood warblers. But in any event, this New World family has an abundance of species that are just overwhelming. And if you think it's difficult here, the total number of species, we'll get to the next one, Laura, 418 species and 91 different genera. And most of them are in South America. There are two subfamilies. There's 119 species recorded in the AOS area, which is all the way down to Panama through Middle America, but also the West Indies, in addition to North America, of which 47 have been recorded north of Mexico and 32 recorded in California. And thought about how to get started, and thought about all the problems people have with some flycatchers, especially the Empidonax. But I got really, at some point, frustrated where people were trying to tackle how to tell the various species of Empidonax, which are very similar indeed. But they couldn't tell a pewee from an Empidonax, which is in a different genus and acts very differently. And sometimes I think people start micro rather than doing macro. And basically start with basics and spend, in addition to what you think you see in terms of morphological features, coloration, behavior in flycatchers is incredibly important for separation. So it's overwhelming, but just start at a gentle pace and start watching birds in the field. Don't be a rush to get somewhere else, and sit down and watch what they do. That'll reveal important clues. Next image. So we'll start with something called a tyrannulet. And the species here is northern beardless tyrannulet. Well, the tyrannulets lack whiskers on the sides of the bill, so it's a little bit of being a bit repetitive to say it's a beardless tyrannulet. Nevertheless, just one species recorded north of Mexico. But to get a scope of the issue, 18 are found north of Colombia, from Panama north, and 94 species in the New World, in 12 genera, of which they're in 2 subfamilies. So Tyrannulette, in some cases, it's just referring to a really small flycatcher with a whole world of differences. Nevertheless, when you're thinking about Tyrannulettes, you'll want to think about ours up here, which you can go to southeast Arizona, southwest New Mexico, and South Texas to look for. Short distance migrant. I suppose it could occur in California, but it hasn't yet. It's a tiny little flycatcher, hardly bigger than a kinglet. Next. So my take-home message, can't get the genus right, don't worry about the species, step back and refocus. And pewees are in the genus Contopus, which Laura will cover. Empids are smaller, and there's a certain number of species, only a few are fairly common to common. As a teaser, pewees have longer wings, take more powerful flight, sit on a more obvious branch in the open. And when they come back, they sit like a statue, where the small Empidonax flycatchers are always doing something with their tails, flicking it up or down, and doing something with their wings, and stay more hidden than a perch. So always, before you identify a willow flycatcher, ask yourself, could it be a pewee? Next image. So the first genus we'll discuss in detail are Majorca's flycatchers. So ruler, Lord of the Flies could be the interpretation of the genus. It's a large genus, 22 species, found down into South America in addition to the West Indies. 14 species in the AOS area. 6 in the US have been recorded, of which all but Lasagras flycatcher have been recorded in California. Now, these birds are as large as kingbirds, but they're differently shaped. They have shorter wings and longer tails, and tend to work within the canopy. They're vocal year-round, but have primary songs which are different than the contact calls. And here in California, the common breeding species over most of the state is the ash-throated flycatcher, and that's the essential one to learn. If it's sometimes in the winter, we have others, or in fall, or other species, but they're all rare. And if you see a Majorca's flycatcher, say from April to through August, the odds are overwhelming it's an ash-throated. And it's a pale flycatcher below. All of the Majorcas are slightly crested, long-tailed, rather short wings, works within the canopy on short flights. Most of the species with prominent rufous in the wings and tail. Now, on many of these flycatchers, but particularly Majorcas, they have important tail patterns. And whether you're looking at a wood warbler with an important tail pattern or a Majorca's flycatcher, the way the tail folds and closes up is the tail from above, you're seeing the central tail feathers, which doesn't get you anywhere for identification. Where there's critical patterns of the tail pattern, it's always the outer tail feathers. And on the folded tail from below, on the folded tail, the outer tail feathers are viewed from below. And so here you have a look where it's almost you're teased, but you'll see a little white line which is the edge of the feather, most on the outer tail feather, most of the width of the feather is on the inner web. And you can see the rufous goes up to the shaft of the feather. But right near the tip, just above the branch, you'll see how the dark curls down from the shaft. And that is diagnostic for ash-throated. Now that may seem a little esoteric, but Majorcas will sit for a while. If you have a scope, you can get it in the scope. And if it's facing you, you can look at that outer tail feather. And if you've been working on your Majorcas and remember the different patterns, or at least know what to look for, as Pasteur said, chance favors the prepared mind. Know what to look for. The other breeding Majorcas in California is brown crested, but very local. Okay, next. Another shot, how you'd see it from the side. You can see the rufous on the primary edges. Notice there you're seeing the central tail feathers, so you're not able to see any of the rufous in the tail, but you notice it in flight. Quite pale coloration, moderately small bill for the size. I want to thank, notice all of these images are by Larry Sansoni. He's helped me for decades in preparing these, or supplying the photos for my talks, and now joined by Laura. Next image. So here, the bird on the left is a brown crested, and you can see the rather hefty bill. Now this is the subspecies found in East Mexico that gets into South Texas. The bird on the right with a smaller bill, this is one we corrected. That's actually an ash-throated, and you can see the dark tip to the tail with a smaller bill. Brown crested and ash-throated are tricky. The bill is good and the calls are entirely different. And there's a subtle difference in the tail pattern. Now, brown crested breeds locally along the Colorado River in Southeast California. They arrive right around the 1st of May, the last few days of April. But most people see them June, July. It's a little warm to go down there this time of the year. The temperatures that exceeded 120 degrees Fahrenheit this year. They have distinctive calls from ash-throated. Best mark, I guess I would say, in addition to vocalizations, is the bill. Anywhere away from the Colorado River, there's the Morongo Valley is the site they've nested at, and also the South Fork of the Kern River. Anywhere else, strictly accidental, with a few winter records of birds that have returned multiple winters on the coast of Southern California, and a few Northern California records. Many other subspecies down through the Neotropics and into South America. Next image. Now this is another Majorcas, but one with very limited rufous in the wings and tail, with a very sad call note, kind of like a Say's phoebe. And it occurs mainly in California as a winter visitant, late fall and winter. In both Southern and Northern California, most of the records are from the coastal slope. So a sad descending call, a relatively, it's not the right angle, longish, slender bill for the size. They're small, again, lacking rufous in the wings and tail. So a tropical species that breeds into the Southwest, but over 100 records for California, most of which are involved wintering birds. The first one in Death Valley was 1968. Next image. So back to just one more comment on the dusky cap. If you see a Majorcas in the winter, it's as likely to be a dusky capped as it is an overwintering ash-throated. Now, the great crested flycatcher, that's the Majorcas they have in the east. And it's a little bigger than an ash throat, with a dark gray chest and bright yellow belly. It has a different tail pattern too, a little more olive above. Very rare fall migrant in California. Most of the records are near the coast. They have a notorious reputation for staying only one day, so they're gone the next. There is one record into the winter, or two records into the winter. They did not successfully winter, and they're two spring records. But most of the records are between about the 15th of September and the 10th or so, 15th of October. Next image. This is the Nuttings flycatcher, a tropical species that occurs casually into Arizona and has nested along the Colorado River at the Bill Williams Delta on the Arizona side. It's a little yellower. It looks almost identical to ash-throated, but with very different calls, more like a gray crested, shorter primary projection. But identification from ash-throated is very different. Steve Howell, an expert on Middle American birds, says there's likely two species of Nuttings flycatchers. There's two subspecies with different calls. His title of his article that he wrote for Katinga was, "You Ain't Seen Nuttin' Yet." An attempt at bird humor. Next image. Laura?
Okay, so getting into the genus Tyrannus or kingbirds, there's 13 species in this genus, including scissor-tailed flycatcher and the fork-tailed flycatcher. 11 species found in the AOS area, 10 in the ABA area, and 8 recorded in California. Kingbirds are generally large and pretty stocky. For example, when you try to prep a kingbird, they have a very different shape in comparison to something that's thrush-like. It's more cylindrical, for lack of a better word. They have pretty long wings, and they mostly perch out in the open and take aggressive flights in pursuit of the insects they eat. So on this slide here, the 3 pictures on the left, we have Western kingbird, which is the most widespread kingbird species in Western North America, including California. This is in comparison to the Cassin's kingbird on the right, which is locally common in most parts of the coastal slope regions of Southern and Central California. It is slowly expanding its range northward, but it's rarely seen outside of its range in California, principally in winter. So, more close-up shot of some of our more common kingbirds. As you can see, Cassin's has a darker head, and the paler throat kind of really contrasts with that head in comparison to Western, which you can see is kind of like more uniform. It's also darker above, but has paler wings and a browner tail that doesn't really have that sharp outline that the white border presents in comparison. So here is the tropical and couch's kingbird. They're basically impossible to tell apart in the field unless they call. Tropical species breeds in Middle America and is a casual winter stray to southern Arizona, where it has bred and has been recorded once in California, in my home county of Orange County, in the winter. Here we have the much more uncommon eastern kingbird. It is as the name implies, widespread in eastern North America, breeding west into Oregon and Washington and rarely into northeast California. It's a rare migrant elsewhere in California, and you'd primarily see them in early fall if they do occur. And they winter in flocks in eastern Peru and Bolivia. So a quick comparison, obviously they look pretty different, but here on the left we have a fork-tailed flycatcher, which is widespread in the tropical Americas and occurs casually in eastern North America. There's not a lot of records for California. There's fewer than 5 fall records, and this one from Sonoma County that's photographed here is the first of those 5 records. The scissor-tailed flycatcher is a close relative of the western kingbird, and they have hybridized and paired together. It's the state bird for Oklahoma and is a common nester on the southern Great Plains and much of Texas. It's rare, but it's also a regular visitor to California, which you've probably seen before if you get the eBird Rare Bird Alert updates. So next up, we have the genus Contopus, which is pewees. There are 14 species of pewees, 11 in the AOS area, 5 in the ABA area, and 4 found in California. They're moderate to large-ish size birds with long wings and a pretty short tail. Most species, so in comparison to Empids, they remain still and they don't bob their tail around. So behaviorally, I find that to be the easiest thing to look for when you're looking for that distinguishment. But they take flights out into the open sky and return and remain still for the most part. So Western and Eastern wood pewees remain the hardest North American flycatcher identification problem. I recall this when some specimens were brought over to the San Diego Natural History Museum from the San Bernardino Natural History Museum, and trying to use our reference collection to distinguish their pewees, and without much success, because even if you have them in hand as specimens, they're still pretty confusing. So aside from that, if you see them in field, you probably shouldn't try to confidently proclaim that it's either Western or Eastern wood pewee if they're not calling. So here is our common wood pewee. It's a widespread breeder in Western North America, including California, where it is also a common migrant, but you won't see these until May. This is in comparison to the Eastern wood pewee. As you probably noticed, the pictures show 2 seemingly very similar birds. It's casual in California in late spring and fall. As a second reminder, don't try to confidently say you have an Eastern wood pewee unless it vocalizes, because they look very, very similar. So here is olive-sided flycatcher. It's a widespread North American species. The song differs between the boreal north and western states. As a mnemonic, we have with 3 beers in contrast to what peeves you, with a strong emphasis on that middle note from birds in the coniferous forest in the west. So it's stockier than Eastern and Western wood pewees, and it also has a shorter tail, and it usually perches on tall treetop snags. So our final recorded pewee for California, the greater pewee, it's a tropical species which breeds in the mountains of the Southwest. It's pretty rare. in California, and usually if it's seen in the winter. It has a longer tail compared to the olive-sided flycatcher, with more blended upper parts, and as you can see, it has a very contrasting lower orange mandible. It also has that slight tuft or crest at the back of the head. And handing it off to you, John.
Right. So I wanted to spend a little time, remember my interest in history. And there's a man who's largely forgotten. He's, in my opinion, one of the most significant ornithologists that ever lived in the United States. Alan R. Phillips, note 2 L's for Alan, 1914 to 1996. A man who was born in New York City. Family owned a lot of real estate in Manhattan. They had a summer house up in Maine where his mother turned him on to birds. And he was simply extraordinary. He went on to get a degree graduated from the Horace Mann School, then for boys, in 1931, a master's degree at the University of Arizona in 1939, a PhD from Cornell in 1946. But he spent the years of 1942 to 1945 in the Army, where he said he hated every single day of it. But he got away to collect birds, and he spent some time on the brig for saying unkind things to his superior officer, but nevertheless found himself on a boat to Omaha Beach the day after D-Day, June 7th, 1944. And the man on the adjacent landing craft was Ralph S. Palmer, who went on to write The Birds of Maine and wrote the first handbooks to the birds of North America during the 60s and the early 70s. Phillips, we often kidded, a few of us, his initials are ARP. So with apologies to John Irving, we would refer the world according to ARP. And he really had his stuff together. For instance, and particularly he was good with land birds and could discern the slightest coloration patterns. He looked at behavior. He was the first one to deduce that the gray flycatcher, unlike the other Empidonax, bobbed its tail down like a phoebe. And there's a famous question that was asked apparently by Teddy Roosevelt, President Theodore Roosevelt, to John Muir when he visited Yosemite Park in May of 1903. He asked, "How do you tell the Hammonds from the Wright's flycatcher?" So the Wright's flycatcher then was the dusky flycatcher. And of course the Hammonds, and they both breed in Yosemite Park in different habitats. Now, I don't know what answer John Muir gave. Muir had many talents, but I'm not sure he was an expert on something like that. But that's what was said. So Phillips, he spent a ton of time in museums. He visited them all. His initials are on bird tags in every museum in the country. It's said that he slept in museums. Phillips was, most of his life, he never exceeded 100 pounds. He had a lithe, thin figure. They joke that he would sleep in the trays of specimens in the cases. Now, I don't think that's physically possible, but nevertheless, The type specimen for the Wright's flycatcher, what we now call the dusky flycatcher, was collected in El Paso in 1858, and I'm not sure which museum it is in. Nevertheless, Phillips came across that specimen and discovered that, in fact, it was a gray flycatcher and not a dusky flycatcher. So the type specimen was misidentified. So the scientific name Empidonax wrighti now applies to gray flycatcher, and Phillips had to create a new name for the dusky flycatcher, which he named after the famous ornithologist Harry Oberholzer, who wrote The Bird Life of Texas. So that's Empidonax oberholzeri. And you go down these detours into the literature, and I couldn't get Sora to look at the Auck article he wrote in 1939 today. The network is down for Sora anyway, which will tell more of the story. But I had sort of known there was confusion. But it was just this morning I came across this, and it's one more feather in Phillips' hat. Phillips, he had few friends. He loved to debunk everything, especially from a prominent ornithologist, and did not necessarily do so in a kind way, whether it was a superior military officer or a so-called ornithologist. So Phillips went on through his life. He wrote numerous, 168 papers and 4 books, and named or renamed 160 taxa of birds. He spoke French and German perfectly and knew every verse of Gilbert and Sullivan and would change the verses to pillory various ornithologists that irritated him. So, nevertheless, if you can find it with all of Phillips' personality quirks, there's a book you can probably find online. It's called The Birds of Arizona by University Press by Alan Phillips, Gail Monson, or Joe Marshall and Gail Monson. There's so many insightful things written by Phillips in that on geographical variation in the hermit thrushes and these various papers, and especially on Empidonax. We'll carry on. Moving ahead, Laura, there we are. The Empidonax, Lord of the Mosquitoes and the Gnats, with very similar appearances. Just think, nearly 100 years went by with the type specimen of dusky flycatcher being misidentified. In this case, knowing where you are, studying status and distribution, looking carefully at behavior, and especially listening carefully to the contact notes. Most of the species do not sing during migration, so you need to learn the contact notes. Next image. So there's the El Paso. That's not the El Paso specimen, but that's the bird species that created all the problems. The gray flycatcher. 14 species in the genus overall, all in the AOS area, 11 species in the ABA, 9 in California. And from peewees, they're typically smaller with shorter wings and a longer tail, work within the canopy rather than outside of the canopy, all do something with their tail, learning when they molt. Most species molt on the breeding grounds. I'm sorry, I have that exactly wrong. Most species molt on the winter grounds. 2 species molt on the breeding grounds, Acadian and Hammonds, which in our case in California, that's why Hammonds is a later migrant, because when other species are migrating south to Mexico to molt, Hammonds remain on the breeding grounds to molt. Bobbing their tails year-round, except when a bird is actively singing on a more exposed branch even a telephone wire, where they seem to be more intent on singing than bobbing their tails or flicking their tail up. Next image. Well, our life has gotten simpler. There used to be, well, when I started birding, for most of my birding life, we knew these things as Western Flycatchers, which is what they're called again. Studies showed contact song, male position, call note differences between birds of the interior West and more coastal areas. So they were split into Cordilleran and Pacific slope flycatcher, but then careful research showed that over a large swath of the area of the West, they were genetically intermediate and their vocalizations were intermediate. So last year they were lumped by unanimous vote by the checklist committee. Western Flycatchers, this is the one you want to learn if you're in over most of California. It's the common Empidonax, whether it's a breeder or a migrant. It kind of has a crescent shaped or an expanded, pretty distinct eye ring with a bold expansion to the rear of the eye ring. They're somewhat yellowish and greenish in coloration throughout. Rather longish bill with an all orange lower mandible and very distinctive call notes. Next image. And here's the dusky or Wright's flycatcher and the Hammonds. A dusky flycatcher is a fairly common breeder in the mountains of most of the state. Very limited in the Coast Range, south of San Francisco Bay, and breeds in the Sierra, typically in more open habitats above and below where Hammonds nest, which preferred older growth coniferous forest. Now, duskies are rare as a migrant over most of the state and way overreported, whether it's the coast of California or the Central Valley or the coastal slope of Southern California, and are basically unknown in Southeast California with a record maybe every 10 to 15 years, if you can believe it. Yet alone they winter in West Mexico. By the time you get up to the Antelope Valley, northern LA County, the Mojave Desert, you see small numbers of duskies, maybe it's 10 to 1 Hammonds, but duskies are regular. And by the time you get up to where I live in Bishop, there are actually more migrant dusky flycatchers than Hammonds. And so this is not well published, but when we get to Phillips here, let's see the next image. Oh, well, maybe we get to the text later. Another Empid. Oh, thank you, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
Here's Phillips again.
Okay, there we go. Should be the right one.
Some wisdom. Phillips had all this worked out too. No, dusky flycatchers migrate more commonly in the mountains than in the valleys, at least in spring. And then notice this statement: except along the lower Salt, Gila, and Colorado rivers, were apparently absent. So Phillips had all of this worked out. And remember, he worked entirely from specimens, many of which he himself collected. And more words of wisdom. Shall we go back and cover the buff-breasted so we don't miss that, Laura?
Yeah, let me. Okay, here we go.
Here's the buff-breasted. This is one. There's actually a record for California. A bird seen in mid-May in eastern Kern County in the Mojave Desert. To see it, you go to southeastern Arizona, where it breeds very locally. The Huachucas Mountains mainly, but also the Chiricahuas, and very locally in southwest New Mexico, and formerly in the Davis Mountains of West Texas. It's tiny. It's the one Empid that's fairly distinctive in terms of plumage, with a cinnamon-colored breast and and a good I-ring, and it gives a soft wit call. Next image, and we'll move right along.
So I just wanted to interject that I know it's now about 6 o'clock, which is when we let everybody know the event might be over. It's just want to acknowledge that for people who are guests, that we understand if you can't stay longer. We are recording this and we can send everybody the recording. If you're not able to stay, if you are able to stay, we'd love for you to stay, and maybe we'll be going another 10 or maybe 15 minutes. But just wanted to thank everybody for coming if you have to go, and we will follow up with a link to the talk, and but hopefully you can stay, and we'll have questions at the end. If you have any questions you'd like to add, you can put those in the chat, and even if you're not able to stay to get the answers, we can see if maybe we can follow up tomorrow with the answers to some of those. So,
and we broke our rules, Kristen, but we didn't take questions along the way. So let's blast through these. And so this is Lee's flycatcher, a rare bird in California, but some birds have been on territory in the mountains. And it looks basically like a Hammond's in shape and structure, but has pale flanks and paler underneath, shorter primary tip projection. It's an eastern species. Next image. And Alan Phillips discovered the migratory, that some migrate through the west. On a day in late October, he was puzzled by a bird, went out the next day and shot 3 of them, and discovered the western route. All immatures, at least flycatchers, some that come through in the fall. And there's the quote written by him in his Birds of Arizona. Next image. Willow and alder flycatcher. Willows, they're more common in the fall, starting about now or a little earlier, and all through September. Very late in the spring. They basically, they're going to look like a pewee, but structured like an empid and flick their tail up. But notice hardly any I-ring like a pewee. Birds in the east have slightly more prominent wing bar, Australii, from our Brewsteri. They give a rather rich, liquidy wit call. Next image. And alder, they have a slightly more prominent I-ring, slightly longer primary projection, bolder tertial edges. This is very widespread in the north, but they migrate through South Texas, and they're extremely rare in California and very difficult to be separated with certainty. Their call notes are different in the primary song. Next image. The yellow-bellied flycatcher, very rare, casual in the fall, but a number of records now, very similar to the western flycatcher, but structured more like a least. Quite yellowish and olive with a more circular I-ring. Next image. And look at the long primary projection on this Acadian flycatcher. Very pewee-like, but it does flick its tail. This is a bird of very shaded eastern deciduous forests. They call it Acadian flycatchers. They're not found in Acadia in Maine. They're found where the Acadians ended up in Louisiana. It's more of a southern species, but gets up into extreme southern Canada. Winters mainly in South America. Accidental in the west, unrecorded for Arizona. It's if you think of how long the wings are, the first Empidonax flycatcher that turned up in Europe was an Acadian flycatcher across the Atlantic. It's the only empid that's a trans-Gulf migrant of the eastern migrant flycatchers. The rest come up, avoid flying over the Gulf of Mexico, and come up through South Texas. Next image. Laura.
Okay, so moving on to the genus Cyornis. Lots of phoebes. So on the left here, everybody probably knows this one, the black phoebe. It's extremely widespread, often found near water, but It's basically everywhere in every neighborhood these days. This is in contrast to Say's phoebe, which is also quite common, but it's mostly a winter visitant to the coastal slopes, mainly after the first week of September and into early March, and it breeds in the interior in arid regions. It frequently strays to eastern North America as well, just because of how migratory it is. Oh, and before I move on, probably everybody knows this, but there are 3 species within this genus, all known from California. I mentioned are 2 common ones, but then we also have the eastern phoebe, which is rare and primarily seen here in winter. They're generally medium-sized with dark tails, pretty cooperative if you want to see them, and they usually perch up in exposed places. They bob their tails down,
I
and
think we have an image of the eastern phoebe.
yes, I will move on to that in the next slide. And maybe I'll skip that note on eponymous names since we don't have time. But here's eastern phoebe, as John was mentioning. It's rare but regular to California, primarily late fall and winter, as I mentioned before. But of course, as the name suggests, it's mainly found in eastern North America. Finally, moving on to genus Pyrocephalus. As the name suggests, we have a very fiery red male here. So we have the vermilion flycatcher male, female, and juvenile. Male bottom right, and then female top left, and juvenile bottom left. Hopefully I'm describing it in the right order. At least that's what it appears to me on my screen. It's 2 species now after the split of the Galapagos Island species, which might have 2 separate species there within that, but one might be extinct at this point, as seems to be the trend with a lot of island species, unfortunately. We have 1 species in the AOS and ABA areas, and obviously in California, only vermilion flycatcher. Its appearance and behavior, especially with bobbing their tail down, is much like the phoebes, but they are slightly smaller. The male obviously is really bright and beautiful and has a really interesting display flight, if you happen to see it. The short, pale supercilium is the best way to identify female and immature male vermilion flycatchers, which, in contrast to the brightly colored male, are a little bit trickier.
I'll just add, Laura, that the immature male looks much like the female in the fall, and then gradually acquire the red plumage through the winter.
Yeah, and I have in my notes before I forget to say this, their breeding range is expanding west and north and strays mainly in winter. And they've become a lot more frequent over the last decades. I mean, if you're in the Southern California area, you might have noticed that they especially love golf courses. But of course, they're expanding into other regions as well. So that wraps it up, I think. Let me stop this share if I can. So
Wonderful.
happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much. And folks, since there's a smaller group now, you can either put your questions in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, that sounds good too. And they can be questions, they can be comments, anything that you'd like to share.
Just curious about, we have a summer bird count that we do locally in Palo Alto, and it's been showing a significant decline in western wood pewees. So is that a general phenomena? Is there a global decline in western wood pewees, even olive-sided flycatchers for that matter? And if so, what's the theory for the decline?
I agree with you. I see fewer pewees. I used to see in late May in the deserts up to 100 pewees at a certain site. I'm lucky if I see 10 now, which no doubt is going to be reflected on the breeding grounds. And I haven't researched, but I would imagine the breeding bird atlas data would reflect that. But I haven't looked. But that's something you can check on the trend lines. And as to why, I would just guess fewer bugs. But I don't. That's strictly a guess. Laura, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know much about population trends with flycatchers either. Primarily look more or am more up to date on shorebird and warbler trends, if I'm being honest. But I mean, there is that general change with that general trend with climate change of a lot of species that even ones that are usually not dependent on insects, they are dependent on insects for feeding their young, for example, with bluebirds and a lot of other birds. Just the shift in phenology of flowers and other plants that changes the phenology of, emerging insects. And that kind of changes how successfully a lot of birds successfully breed, because you need a lot of insects to be feeding young. And sometimes, because of climate change and other factors, the schedules aren't aligning as they should. And for example, with talking with the botanists at the San Diego Natural History Museum, they've been seeing that shift in phenology of when plants flower, and how a lot of plants and insects, that partnership is kind of declining because they are used to meeting each other at the same time of year, and they're not now. So I'm sure that affects a lot of bird populations, especially ones that are super dependent on insects like flycatchers.
Thank you. It's a great talk. This is my favorite group of birds. So it's great to hear this.
Thank you.
Laura, there is a question in the chat. How reliable is tail and wing flicking as an identifier for Empids?
You can comment too, Laura, on this. It's essential. Remember before, you want to identify within Empids, you want to identify, make sure it's not a pewee. So as soon as you see that tail movement or wing flicking, you know, unless it's a phoebe or a vermilion, it's not a pewee. So at least get to the right genus. And then there's all sorts of subtleties. Well, and non-subtleties. Remember Alan Phillips? He was the one who figured out that gray flycatcher dips its tail down like a phoebe. And he did that probably, I'm guessing, close to a century ago. He really studied behavior. And then within the Empids, Acadian, not that we get to see them, they're sluggish. And it's almost like they say to themselves, oh, that's right, we're an Empidonax. I better flick that tail a little bit. But Hammonds and Duskies, for instance, it's been well known for a half century that Hammonds do a lot more wing flicking in addition to their tail flicking up, so that kinglet-like wing flicking is typical of Hammonds, less so of Dusky and Least. Hammonds, Dusky, Least, and Gray all look pretty similar. Hammonds, remember, molts on the breeding ground, so when they come south in the fall, they actually look different color-wise. Gray and Dusky look very, very similar, but are easily separable once you see what the tail movement is doing. Flicking up in a Dusky, downward tail bob in a Gray. But that didn't help the folks on the type specimen of Dusky. It wasn't doing any flicking, lying dead in a tray. And it was left to Alan Phillips to see that the type specimen of Dusky was in fact a gray flycatcher. Laura, want to add on to that from your field experience?
Yeah, I guess from someone who is a lot less experienced and now that I don't have that many opportunities to bird, with just because of life, having a few very reliable behavioral cues, is very, very helpful to me. I don't have a stellar memory, and I don't like to bring a thick kind of like coffee table guide with me every time I go out. So just having those few features that I can really like have a mental flow chart in your head, basically, kind of build that flow chart. And it can be as detailed as you want to be, but for me, oftentimes it's just, oh, it's an Empid or it's a pewee, and I'll snap a picture and I'll figure out when I get home and I can get to my Empid guide. So it doesn't have to be more complicated than that if you don't want it to be, because obviously in the field, especially as I've noticed this summer, it's very jarring to see the birds out in the field because they feel so far away to me, and like I don't have them in hand, and obviously they're alive and doing their behaviors instead of just sitting in a tray. So yeah, I think I've relied a lot more on behavior nowadays birding than field marks, because just looking at specimens in a tray and in a field like guide, just I don't see the details as well when I see that in the field in comparison to having it up close.
I'll recommend well, there's a new book out on Empid identification and peewees, but Ralph Hoffman wrote in 1927 Birds of the Pacific States. It's one of the best bird books ever written, in my opinion, because he puts you in the field in the first time experiencing the species and gives you all of the behavioral clues. The illustrations, Alan Brooks does line illustrations and paintings, and is published by Houghton Mifflin 7 years before the Peterson Guide. Hoffman fell off a cliff on San Miguel Island getting a botanical specimen. The trowel broke, but he was extremely insightful. The book's out of print, but used copies can be found fairly easily at not an exorbitant cost.
Okay, well, thank you, John and Laura, so much for a really extensive and interesting talk and presenting all that information. And we really appreciate you being partners with us at PBO, and love the work that you're doing. And thank you so much for your time. We will be sending an email out to everybody this week. So John and Laura, you have any links you want to send me, or any last words you want to say to wrap things up?
I do. Laura, thank you, always. It's a pleasure to work with you, and everybody knows that part of a bird club, there's somebody, a young person that shows lots of promise. Do what you can to help them in your own way. Kindness and respect. And mentoring is extremely important. It's a two-way street, both for the student and the professor, but the older adult, but it can mean so much in the development of that individual and for yourself. And besides, we're not getting younger, and we care. I don't mean it sounds a bit like an old song, but we care about the environment we live in, and if the people aren't steeped in it, if they're not interested, you don't have the advocates. Many of the organizations sponsor young people. Laura's quite involved with as a student advisor for the WFO youth program, which we're always looking to update. And many other organizations have outstanding programs for young birders as well. So that's my only parting comment. Laura?
Yeah.
I just would like to make one comment, if I may. Thank you, John. I took a quick look during the program at the Birds of Arizona. It's available in a variety of places. I didn't realize it was that Elliot Porter, the
Yes.
famous photographer. That's pretty impressive. He's really special.
And the paintings by George Sutton, Oklahoma Birds. He was a genius too, a fabulous, very gifted individual with beautiful paintings. So, and probably the cost of the book. What did you find for the cost of the book?
I found one for $37.
There you are.
Yeah.
What his insights, in addition to everything else, he breaks it down into understandable terms. So the 3 subspecies groups of hermit thrushes, he lays it right out there so that you can follow along.
Laura, did you have any last words you wanted to share?
I mean, just in response to John, just echoing that mentorship is very valuable on both ends, and all 4 of my mentors have been there for me at different stages of both my life and in stepping into this career path, and they've all contributed different sources of knowledge and advice and different ways of thinking. And so that is really valuable for someone who's developing their own interests and their own personalities to have all those different viewpoints.
SFBBO is a nonprofit. With your support, we will continue to inform decision makers, inspire people to act, and involve diverse communities in our work. Please visit our website to learn more and get involved today.